We teach karate hoping that you never, never have to use it for those sorts of purpose. But should there be an occasion, then jutsu is far more important than do.
If you were to define or differentiate the Budo sort of martial way, like the do in Budo, compared to Bujutsu,
Yeah.
or Bujutsu, how does that distinction influence your personal way? So two questions: what is the difference, and how did it influence you and your way?
Well, let me answer it in two slightly different ways. First of all, what is the difference between jutsu and do? Bojutsu, Budo, karate do, karate jutsu, Kendo, Kenjutsu, etc. Actually, the one that's probably quite a surprise to people, Judo, is just an extension of jiu-jitsu. It's not something that's different. It's something that's developed. What is better? Neither. Both. It's one of those questions, how long is a piece of string? If we go back in time, before the shogunates in Japan, the samurai had one purpose, and that was to kill. They were expert swordsmen, mostly, but they didn't just use a sword. They used the knife, tanto jutsu. They used the sword, Kenjutsu. They practiced a form of Budo, but it was a Bujutsu. In other words, it was created around this necessity for them to fight and to become ever increasingly more proficient in their task. When the shogunates in the early 1600s came about in Japan, the samurai were prohibited from fighting with one another. The shogun took very strict control of the processes, the political process, the military process. Prior to the shogunate, you had constant civil war in Japan. All of that stopped. But the samurai still, as a caste, as a group, still wanted to remain pertinent. And they started to develop their art. They started to develop their techniques and their attitudes and their way of life into a way of developing way of life. In other words, the way, do. So Kenjutsu became not the fighting art of the sword, but the way of the sword, Kendo. Jiu-jitsu became Judo. If we talk about karate, there was no such thing as karate do, karate jutsu, should I say. Because karate really only as a word, as a format, only came into effect long after the shogunate. But the concepts of what today we call karate do were formed in te, the original art in Okinawa. And it would be correct to call te tejutsu. Because what happened is that when the fighting art of te came to Japan, it started to be incorporated in the way of karate and became karate do. But karate do is not as ancient a concept as kendo, purely and simply because it still exists in Okinawa as a jutsu form. Now, the second part of the question, in terms of how that affects me and the way that I both teach and practice my karate. I do believe that, and I've spent many years training some of the top military and police groups around the world. In my other life, I'm well known as someone who trains governments and organizations who are sending people into high-risk regions. The combative side of karate still teaches many aspects of developing personal, organizational, family safety that a pure do form has difficulty fulfilling. Okay? Because do is about developing the individual. Jutsu is about being the warrior at the gate. Now, one of the things that we say is that the warrior is never respected until the enemy is at the gate. That concept of the warrior being at the gate can be your home. In many countries of the world now, and that includes Australia, for the first time ever, people are experiencing home invasions. There was a piece in the newspaper just the other day about a lady in her 70s, and these people burst into her home. They don't care that there's somebody at home. And she was threatened with injury and so on if she didn't give up the keys of her car. And she said, no, nobody comes into my home. This is my home. And she became really strong and aggressive. And not stupidly, but positioned herself that they had to make a decision. Is it worthwhile? This woman is not behaving like a victim. This woman is behaving like a warrior. Is it perhaps not better for us to go and find someone else more likely to act as a victim? And they literally left her home. She called the police, and she wasn't violated. She wasn't harmed. She behaved like the warrior at the gate. But I don't know whether that lady had ever done a martial art. I've got no idea at all. But warrior spirit is something that can be trained. And we teach karate hoping that you never, never have to use it for those sorts of purposes. But should there be an occasion, then jutsu is far more important than do. So if we want to teach correctly, if we want karate to be of real benefit to the community, and the community of which we are a really important part, if we want karate to remain relevant, then the dojo should have a place for both the jutsu and the do, and it should be taught together as a whole rather than it being separated out. But the problem is, of course, is that many, many people have never experienced training in the jutsu form. They've only ever been in a sport karate dojo or a dojo where people only practice a part of what it is karate has to offer.